Welcome back to another Health Hackers review. A while ago, I started using this app-connected breath testing device designed to show you how well you're digesting certain foods so that you can try and see which foods are working for you and which ones might be causing you digestive discomfort and difficulties. It's called FoodMarble Air, and here was the unboxing. I'll explain what else you saw in that box shortly. Now, unfortunately, I stopped using the FoodMarble Air sooner than planned. That wasn't because of the device, it was because I was newly pregnant and got hit hard by nausea and vomiting. I also had a brief stay in hospital with an unexplained medical issue that took weeks to recover from. But before the sickness, I did manage to use the device for 2 weeks, and I interviewed the company's CEO, Aonghus Shortt. Here's a snippet from our chat, then I'll tell you about using the device and some other info before you watch the rest of the interview. My understanding is you developed this to help your fiance. What a dedicated boyfriend. Will you tell us a bit about that story?
Yeah, so well, actually, my wife now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, so my wife Grace, she'd been going into to first her local doctor, then to actually a number of gastroenterologists. Like probably a lot of your audience would be familiar with. It can be a long road when you've got digestive problems. You can be between general practitioners, gastroenterologists, dietitians, nutritionists. She'd been through a number of medications, which none of them had been successful. She had a number of the procedures, like it's really common in this area. Maybe you're getting endoscopies, colonoscopies, different sorts of imaging tests, and they're not they're not the most comfortable tests. She wasn't getting any better. She's probably getting worse. Like she wasn't certainly feeling any better, feeling more confused, despite the best efforts of the different types of clinicians. She was kind of back to square one, where it seemed like food was a major factor. Like clearly sleep and stress affects everyone. It affects their digestion especially, but food seemed to be a factor. But she was still at square one. For me, I was coming from an engineering background. I came across breath testing because I was doing some research for Grace. I had some awareness of how you would go about measuring some of these gases, and I could see that the sensors that were becoming available would make it possible to make a device that, instead of being something big device in the hospital environment, having something where everyone could have their own device and could start to test with foods that they eat and to see how they're actually responding to those foods. I wasn't thinking of, could this be a company at first? I just made a prototype and I was using it with Grace, and she was finding it useful, and she was finding foods that she either thought that she couldn't eat and actually seemed to be maybe okay, and gave her the confidence to be able to eat those foods. And then likewise, foods that she wasn't sure about, and then she probably got some confirmation that, okay, this maybe it would be good to limit this food in her diet.
So here's how I was using the FoodMarble Air earlier this year, around the time when we did that interview. On the FoodMarble app, I would log my meals, any digestive symptoms, my stress level, bowel movements, and how well I slept. I used the device to take breath tests throughout the day, and each time I would see a score. They call it a fermentation score. You can get anything from 0 to 10, and it's based on the level of hydrogen in my breath. When it's high, apparently it means something I ate or drank has not been fully digested, so it's being broken down by bacteria in my large intestine. On the app, I could go back into my meal log and see which foods I had recently eaten that were high in FODMAPS. FODMAPS stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. It's a mouthful, excuse the pun, but they are types of carbs that can be hard to digest and trigger symptoms in people with digestive issues. So for example, some high FODMAP foods include dairy-based milk and yogurt, some beans, some fruits like apples and pears, vegetables like artichokes, onion and garlic, as well as some wheat-based products like bread. The app shows the different FODMAP components in foods, like inulin, fructose, sorbitol, lactose, and more. And my understanding is your ability to digest each of them depends on your unique mix of gut bacteria. Remember those sachets you saw in the unboxing? Those are 4 packets of different FODMAPs to experiment with. You mix them with water and then take regular breath tests after. They are an optional extra for $29. So without the sachets, the FoodMarble Air costs $179. And with the sachets, it comes to $208. I haven't experimented with the sachets. The company said they are safe to take during pregnancy, but personally, the process just doesn't appeal to me while I'm pregnant. Now, I've not had any significant long-term digestive problems like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. So when I started trialing this device, it was to see what I could tell you about the user experience and to see what I could learn from it. At the end of this video, I will sum up my likes and dislikes. But here's more of my chat with FoodMarble CEO Aonghus Shortt. Now that you have progressed with it, developed it, do you want everyone to be able to use it, or do you just want to reach people who have digestive problems?
Well, so our focus has been people who have digestive problems like IBS and related problems that they're really common, and it can be really problematic for people. So that's been our focus because it's a very clear need for them. We've been very interested to where people are, exploring with the device to kind of see how it could be relevant in different ways to their health. But that's more for us. That's more for the future because we want to have that focus around this very core group that we know that we can help a lot, because we're not necessarily, it's great to be able to explore beyond the boundaries, but for a starting point, we wanted to stick with something that where there was that evidence around that it could be beneficial.
So now to using the actual device. So would it be correct to say that when you breath test a couple of hours after a meal and you get a low score, that means you've digested your FODMAP containing foods well, but if you get a high score, you haven't digested them well?
Yeah, well, that's a good way of putting it. And there's a lot of the different types of FODMAPs kind of digest at different rates. So you have some of them, like the simpler types of FODMAPs, like fructose, for example, and lactose to a degree. They're kind of, you're going to see a response in terms of increase in the breath readings quickly or not. So kind of, within 60, 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours, you're going to start seeing that response from those. For some, can take longer. So like, for example, with inulin, which is it's in a lot of foods, it's in wheat, it's in onions, garlic. That takes long. It's basically that it's a more complex molecule, so it takes longer for the bacteria to start to break it down, because that's ultimately the bacteria are breaking down the FODMAPs when they're not digested fully, and they produce these gases. And so if the bacteria can break them down very easily, it all happens faster. But if it takes them longer to break down the molecules, then it takes a little longer. So that's why with inulin or something like that, it can take a little longer to see that on the breath.
So given the different rates of how they can break down, how do you know that your score is from the food you had at breakfast, lunch, dinner, or even something you ate last night?
Yeah, so that's why we say to people, it's good to take, and you kind of get better at this over time. You start to see that the patterns more over time, but it's good to take, like at first we recommend, say three breath tests after each meal. So one each hour. So after 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and in a way, if you're having kind of 2-3 meals a day, you start to see like you start have pretty good coverage over the whole day. So it means that, if something you had in the morning started to ferment after 4 hours, or you may see it after the second meal, but you get to start to see those patterns over time. So it can be complicated, but digesting food, it is complicated. There's no way we can escape that. So, but if having this data gives you the power to be able to see, okay, because if you get those high breath readings, the app will show you what foods you ate and what was in those foods, and we tried to guide people over time in terms of what they should be looking for, and how the different FODMAPs are digested.
Because I was going to ask, how do you identify which ingredient has caused the problem if you're eating a meal with lots of ingredients? But from what you're saying, it sounds like you've just got to build up a bigger picture by repeating until you see a pattern.
Yeah. So that's one way of doing it, because a lot of times it might just be one thing. So for people, it might just be one thing that they have for breakfast every day. So it kind of becomes quite simple. Sometimes it can be more complex, and where something that becomes very powerful in that instance is where you can do the actual FODMAP challenges. So when you have the actual the packets of each, which each of them have one specific FODMAP, you can test that in a very kind of structured way. And because if you are seeing where, okay, I'm not actually sure if it's inulin or fructose, because I have both in say the breakfast I typically have, or maybe it's something I often have for lunch. And sometimes it's very easy, because say if it's lactose and you have, I don't know, milk in your cereal or something like that, you could swap that out for maybe soy milk or something like that, and it's very easy to kind of separate. But sometimes it's not. So that can be what makes it really powerful when you can test an individual FODMAP at one time.
So this next question is going to sound a bit blunt. I'm still getting my head around FoodMarble.
Yeah, sure.
But if a person is logging what they eat in the app, and they're logging their digestive symptoms they suffer with,
yes,
what is the point in doing the breath test? Because if they're tracking their foods and symptoms, that might be enough to show them what their trigger foods are.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So when it comes to symptoms, it's almost like in the gut, you have a certain symptom threshold. So if you were to eat something, what you'll often see is if you eat enough of something such that it would provoke symptoms, you'll often see where the breath readings start to increase, and then at a certain point the symptoms might kick in. Now that's fine if the symptoms do kick in and you reach a certain level. But if you don't reach that level, you're seeing the breath readings, but you're not seeing the symptoms. So you might think that, okay, actually I had some apple for breakfast, part of my breakfast, and you're like, okay, apple's fine. But in fact, the breath readings would have shown there was some fermentation happening there that was being picked up, but maybe it didn't reach a level where you're symptomatic. So it's a way. First of all, you'll see the breath readings typically before you see the symptoms, and it gives you that extra bit of data when you do have a number of meals that are potentially a factor. Because you might, like, a common thing is somebody eats very late. So say if you have dinner at 9 or 10 p.m. and you go to bed soon after, the next day you probably see your breath readings are elevated, and that's often coming from the previous day. And so being able to see where your breath readings are higher, that gives you some really good information, because sometimes, you just don't see the symptoms, or like, it's just kind of, it's just harder when you just don't have it. Because symptoms, of course, they're more subjective as well, because even when we ask people to kind of rate their, like in the app, we say, give a 1 to 10 score on how your bloating is, for example. But like, what we find often is people will set it to 0 or set it to 10, because they know when they're very bloated, or they know when they experience clear pain. But when you're in the middle, it's not that clear. And so in a way, kind of the breath readings give you that extra information, and also it kind of validates, like if you're starting to feel a little bit of pain and you see the breath readings are elevated, you're like, okay, that's starting to make sense, and I feel a bit more confident that, because for a lot of people, they may get abdominal pain for some other reason. So they might be on their period, or they might just have some other reason to have abdominal pain that it might be related to sports or whatever. And so it just lets you know, okay, there's something happening in your gut, and that seems that could contribute to symptoms in the future, like over the next hour or so. And so, yeah, it's that extra bit of information to give you more confidence in what you're feeling as well.
So if somebody gets a high fermentation score, but they don't have any symptoms, should they still see that as a red flag and be concerned about that food?
Well, it should definitely factor into their thinking. So if they see a high fermentation score, they may not experience symptoms, because they just mightn't get to the level where it's symptomatic. But that's definitely an indicator. So I think, yeah, they should definitely take account of that.
So really, is the goal as a user to just keep trying to get the lowest fermentation scores you can get?
Well, not that yeah, it's a really good point, because what we try to get across to people who are using it is, like, the goal isn't to eliminate fermentation. Like, fermentation, that's just your bacteria. That's how they feed. That's how that, and you've got good bacteria, of course, and you've got bad bacteria. So fermentation isn't bad, but if you've rapid fermentation that then leads to symptoms, that's when it becomes a problem. So what we try and get across is a moderate amount of fermentation that doesn't cause symptoms. That's the best place to be. Eliminating fermentation is probably not the way to go. But like, on the other side, you don't want to be having a situation where your whole life is disrupted by just having symptoms all the time. Because for some of the people who are using our device, the extent to which you people and they're describing just being bent over in pain, they could be on the floor in pain, and that's not good. And it feels like like they're worried about their life. They're worried about, like, what is happening to me, and they might go to the emergency room, and at the end of that, the doctor, all they can tell them is they cannot detect any problem. So it's sort of, for us, we're trying to just get that balance where you're, because, for example, fibers is really good for, like, those prebiotic fibers are really good for you. And especially if you can identify fibers that ferment very slowly. So, for example, psyllium husk, and some of these fibers that any fermentation is very low levels and over multiple days. And usually for people who have these, who have IBS or similar problems, they can tolerate some of that. But if it's really rapid fermentation, that just means, they're going to experience symptoms most likely.
Please add psyllium husk to your food library on the app, because I have it and I can't log it because it's not there yet.
Yeah, you got me. Yeah, that's a really good one. So yeah, no, we definitely want to add all of those. But yeah, that's a really good point.
Going back to the high level of fermentation, the score, does that cause any damage to the body?
So it's a topic that is under active debate, because the fermentation, can be quite significant levels. It's feeding certain gut bacteria. Certain gut bacteria will tend to ferment food more, producing lots of gases. Some of them ferment in different ways, so you're not getting any gas production whatsoever. A lot of there's not much scientific consensus when it comes to which species of, there's small numbers of species of gut bacteria that are generally accepted as beneficial, but it's really actually not that many, and so it's at this point it's too early to say, so but it's, when it comes to, like, if people do have troubling symptoms, they should at some point, they should first probably go to a doctor. Like, if they do troubling, it's important to go to a doctor, because it could be something else. But again, it's like, if if you have been through that process and there doesn't seem to be an underlying cause that can be treated in a normal way, then you need to be able to respond to that.
And it's not that you want people to eliminate foods that cause them high scores. You just want them to be more aware of them and work out a tolerance, perhaps. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's about bringing the levels to a level that you can be comfortable with, without experiencing symptoms.
And how long do people typically use it for? Does Grace still use hers?
Yeah, well, she uses it sometimes from time to time, because when it comes to IBS, it's something that can be kind of episodic, if you want to say. Like, it can kind of come back, like if you change your lifestyle significantly, or if you change location, if you start eating different types of foods, you can definitely start to see effects. Like, an example is, if people take on an exercise regime which is very different to what they typically do, like, they'll see lots of effects in their body. But one is in terms of digestion is, if people start doing lots of endurance exercise, that's very difficult on the gut. And it's not necessarily that it's long-term harmful, but it's just that they will tend to experience more digestive symptoms, especially if they eat very soon before or during the intense exercise. It's a common thing in endurance sports where you get some of those gut symptoms. But even more moderate exercise, if you eat just before, like, people, you often get cramps. But a big part there is, when you're doing intense exercise, all of the, in your gut wall, all of the kind of the proteins which enable the transport of gases into the bloodstream, they start to become less effective, because the blood flows diverted away from the gut. So you'll tend to get, you might get cramped up. Yeah, and people see that. If you eat something and you go out and you exercise, you'll often see that.
Do you think you will add an option to enter your exercise habits into the logging on the app at some point to factor that?
Yeah, it's a good point. One thing we're thinking about is doing an integration with, so, like, I guess over time you're seeing, like, more and more certain types of say like Fitbit or the Apple Watch. There's certain bands that a lot of people are using, so we'd like to have those integrations where, if you're recording that data, that we can pull it in automatically. And yeah, and we've also been thinking about where you can record it in the app. But we like, our focus is to really make everything in relation to food really, really strong. So continuing to improve our food database, for example, and we've lots of technology we're developing to make it easier to link the foods you're eating to when you experience symptoms and things like that. So that's our real focus, is to really nail the parts in relation to food logging and breath testing. But yeah, for sure, if you can link up your exercise and all of the other factors, that's really powerful.
Does taking digestive enzyme supplements ever make a difference to the readings?
Yeah, it definitely does. So say in the case of some people will be lactose intolerant, and if they consume lactose containing foods, they'll start to see their breath readings will go particularly high. But if you're taking lactase, if you take the right amount of lactase, because the problem if you're lactose intolerant is you don't have the enzyme that breaks down lactase. So if you were to take the right amount of lactose, when you're eating the lactose containing food, that should bring down your breath readings quite a bit, and hopefully you won't feel symptoms from it. So that's definitely an approach for people. And there's other enzymes that are definitely relevant to different types of FODMAP components. So that's definitely a factor.
If a customer buys it and doesn't like it or doesn't get on with it, what's your returns policy?
Yeah, I mean, we tend to be pretty good. So if somebody's gotten the device and they're not satisfied, we just say, get in contact. We'll first of all try and help to see if we can help them become satisfied, and if not, we're pretty fair when it comes to returns and things like that.
Oh, I wanted to just mention, does cooking a food not make a difference to the fermentation process? Because I noticed when I'm logging a meal that if I want to log steamed cauliflower, the option on the app is fresh cauliflower, not cooked. So I didn't know if maybe it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So there are some types of cooking techniques that will have an impact. So, for example, if so a lot of FODMAPs are water soluble. So if you boil or soak a lot of foods that contain FODMAPs, the FODMAPs will actually go into the water. They'll start going into the water. So you'll see with a lot of things like certain beans and legumes, you'll see the water starts to get thick. And so, part of that is, relates to the FODMAPs. And it's a way to actually reduce the FODMAP content of certain foods. So, certain types of legumes, you just soak them in water and drain out the water, and do that a couple of times. It will actually reduce the FODMAP content. And in terms of cooking, like cooked food tends to be easier to digest than raw food. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily better for you, but it's just that it can take longer to digest food that isn't cooked. But it's in some cases it can have that effect.
So does it matter that when I'm logging it, the food library offers me an option of fresh cauliflower, carrot, broccoli, not cooked?
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing is to pick the food that is closest to what you're eating. So if it's steamed broccoli, for example, raw broccoli, there's a lot of variation in even in any food type, but like logging raw broccoli for steamed broccoli, that's perfect. It's only in rare instances where the way in which it's cooked will have that very significant impact. So that's totally fine. And we say to people as well, like, it might be that they have a certain variety of something. Like, for example, if you take stuff like meats and fish and so on, like people sometimes bring up, well, we don't have that particular cut of beef or whatever, but there's no FODMAPs in meat. So we'll just say to people, that doesn't matter that much, but they might be interested just to log meats anyway, just simply to have that complete collection of what they have eaten. And I guess they can see the calories and stuff like that as well. But yeah, no, it's about kind of getting, get logging the foods that are as close as possible. So like, you don't need to get too concerned if it's not exactly the right food, but it's quite close. So like cherry tomatoes versus regular tomatoes, it's about getting the quantity as opposed to necessarily the variety. While there can be variations, it's not as common.
On that last point Aonghus was making there, I've got some things to say about the food logging process. So let's jump into my roundup of likes and dislikes about using the FoodMarble Air device and app. I like to end on the positives, so we'll begin with the dislikes. Firstly, slow warm-up. When I go to take a breath test, I switch on the device, select breath on the app, and I have to wait for up to 60 seconds at a time before it's ready. It's not something I can do in a hurry. Next, 10 times per day. When I used the device for those 2 weeks back in May, my aim was to take breath tests roughly every hour for about 3 hours after each meal. The company suggests trying not to take more than 10 breaths in 24 hours. You can set reminders, but it's a commitment. Food library. You heard Aonghus tell me that when logging food, pick the food that is closest to what you're eating. But if I'm logging custom entries for foods that I've eaten because they don't exist on the app, then I'm not benefiting from being able to see which FODMAP components they contain. Talking of logging, I find the meal entry process on the app a bit fiddly. A contributing factor to my opinion here might be that I recently completed another review video that featured food logging on an app, and I found that one to be easier. My final dislike is that I personally found it tricky to spot certain patterns in those 2 weeks of using the device every day. There were times when I'd get a higher fermentation score, then I'd repeat eating the food that I suspected caused it, and I wouldn't get the same score again. I probably could have learned more about my digestion had I done the FODMAP challenges. You know, those sachets I showed you earlier, but you've already heard me say why I didn't do those. One time, according to the notes that I kept, I got the highest fermentation score possible, 10, after a meal. Then I retested my breath just over 5 minutes later, and the score had suddenly dropped to 3.1. Then, about 35 minutes later, I tested my breath again and it was up at 8.8. Back in May, in an email from FoodMarble, I was told, most pregnant women see changes in their digestion over the course of the different trimesters, so getting an accurate reading would be hard. Tracking a response to regular meals with the device to see if certain foods aren't working for pregnancy would be of better use. And that pregnancy causes up to a 40% drop in gastric acid secretion and 30 to 50% decreases in pepsin, which breaks down protein. This could be a reason why digestion is disrupted during pregnancy. But I've been using the device again in recent days, just a few breath tests a day, not 10, and almost every breath test I've done has yielded a low score. So I wonder if second trimester pregnancy has actually done good things for my digestion. Okay, now for my likes. Firstly, battery life. A single charge lasted as long as about a couple of weeks. Next, small and lightweight, so much so that I regularly lost it around the house. Super easy setup, and I quite liked having the paper guides with it too. It wasn't all digital. I think I did learn some things. I seem to be fine with lactose, judging by my score after eating dairy. And it was interesting to see that on one day I took digestive enzymes with lunch and dinner, and my breath test scores were low all day. I do appreciate, though, that that is not proof of anything other than a single observation. I've also learned about FODMAPS and a bit about fermentation. Now, my final like is the FoodMarble backstory. Aonghus described how much his then girlfriend was struggling to find answers for her digestive problems, and using his engineering background and some research, he managed to make a prototype breath testing device to help see responses to foods. And when he said that she, Grace, found it useful, I believe him, and I applaud him for that. I also feel that because I don't have IBS or any significant digestive issues, this device wouldn't be as helpful to me as it potentially could be to those who, like Grace, are feeling desperate for more clarity on what foods could be contributing to their issues. One final point about using the app. I asked FoodMarble if there was a way to view all the foods that had prompted higher fermentation scores over a longer period, like a month or more. You know, so you could see all those foods in one place. At the time of recording, there isn't, but my understanding is there's an app update coming this month, August 2021. In an email, I was told the new version will take you through a 6-week discovery plan, and at the end will give you a report showing you what foods caused a rise in fermentation levels and which FODMAPs were associated with those foods. So that's it. A quick transparency note. FoodMarble sent me the kit for free so I could review it. If you see a discount code in the summary text that goes with this video, that means you'll get money off your own FoodMarble Air and I will receive an amount at no extra cost to you. Please know my review videos represent good faith and honest opinion. You've probably already gathered that though. And anything on healthHackers should not be considered personal or medical advice, of course. If you liked watching this video, I would love it if you hit the like button or subscribe or leave me a comment below. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.